Well, people often say to me, where's your favourite place? What do you most like fishing for? Well, here we are, we're on the River Wye, just above Hereford, one of my favourite fishing places. We're going to fish for barbel, we're going to fish for chub, two of my favourite species. So all in all, this is going to be a nice day. We've got here lovely and early, the sun's not even over the top of the trees yet. It's September, one of my favourite months of the year for fishing, because fish and their appetite is very much a balance between water temperature and oxygen. At the moment we've got this lovely, we get these chilly evenings, we get these nice warm days, so we've got this lovely combination of warm water with plenty of oxygen in it. The fish almost certainly are going to feed well. And I'm going to walk up the river and look for places where I'm going to find these barbel. Now, they're a powerful fish, barbel, but like most animals, they're lazy. So they like to sit in places where there's a nice smooth piece of water. Never go where the water's rolling and tumbling over. They don't like that. They like a good pace, but they like it smooth. And they like it to be adjacent to somewhere where they can just slide in and out and pick up food coming down on the current. If we look across to the other side of the river, we've got all that lovely shelter along underneath those trees, that lovely smooth water, as I say. Look, just about walking pace that's going through at. And then if we come back across to this side of the river, and then you've got all these little gullies here, this high bank. Now when this river comes up, it will come to the top of that bank, and those fish will have swapped from that smooth water over there, and they will be hiding in these little bits on the inside of this bend here, and that will be their refuge. That's how they survive in such a massive, powerful river. Now the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting bait in. And you're all going to go, yeah, that's obvious. But all too often I see people come to a river like this and they see maybe a couple of barbel roll, and then straight in, bosh, in goes the ledger, hook a fish and spook the rest of the shoal. I'm going to start baiting now, and my baiting will last at least an hour before I even get my rod out of the car. Because what I want is those fish to have started to get competitive with each other over that bait. They'll start to forget all about me and they'll be thinking about each other. I'm going to get that bit before he does. So even if I make one or two mistakes, they won't even notice I'm there. And that is the secret to keep fish feeding all day. Take your time. Well, I've made up my mind. This is where I'm going to start. For all the reasons I've already explained, I've got that lovely steady water over there, nice drop off. The water's come across a lot of shallows just above me here. There's swans all over it, pulling up the weed, stirring up the food, and that's all going to settle in this little drop just here. I've got a half a car full of fishing tackle and I've got a half a car full of ground bait. Because without the bait, the fishing tackle is useless. It's like going out and buying a Ferrari and getting the cheapest set of tyres you can buy. It doesn't work, you ain't going to stay on the road. If you don't get the bait in, if you don't get the fish going on the bait first, forget all that fancy fishing tackle. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to put in. I'm going to do a two-prong approach here. I've got a lot of pellet here, which sinks quite slowly and doesn't feed the fish particularly. It's not very oily, it's not very fishy, and I'm going to keep firing some of that out. I've got a little bag that I'm going to put around my neck full of this, so when I walk out and fish, this will be around my neck, so I've got a constant supply of bait. And I should just constantly be getting a little pouch full of this and firing it into that lovely steady water over by the trees. And the chub, which will be in the top half of the swim, invariably the chub are above the barbel. They're in the steady water above the barbel, and by just keep trickling a few of these pellets in, the chub will hear them landing and they will come to them. They will come to the food source, slowly but surely. Then in the rest of the bag here, I've got some boilies, which are going to be my actual hook bait. And again, I shall introduce a few of those steadily but surely. You can get a reasonable sized pouch full in. I'm going to put those in that gap in the trees across there. Because I reckon those barbel are going to be sat just along that lovely crease along there. But to get the whole thing really, the party underway, I've got the pellet again in a very small size. It's going to be like one of those cookery programs. You're going to like this bit. And then once we've got the pellet in, we get plenty of water on the pellet. Get the pellet to expand a bit. This is the one time you can really splash plenty of water in and not worry about it. And just like the cookery programs, you keep mixing the whole thing all the time. Don't leave it. It'll just go into a big soggy mess. Next, we put in some method feeder. This is going to bind all that together So when I put it in a feeder, it will stay there, or when I put it into balls to catapult it across, it will stay. But every time I put anything in, you notice I mix it all up. And then what this is that same stuff the pellet's made of, but in a powder form. So I get a big load of flavour and food out there. It will sense this from a long way downstream. And you'll see when I've got enough water in here, I'll be able to make a ball of it, but it won't be stuck all over my hands. I'll get the consistency right. It might seem rather a lot here, but this is a day's fishing. And up here on the Y, there's a lot of fish. There could be as many as 30, 40, 50 barbel sat out there in that shoal, and I've got to keep them feeding. Okay, so now I've just about got the consistency I want here. You see I can squeeze this into a nice ball, but then when I brush it off my hands, I can lose it all. I don't end up covered in it. So I can make a few balls in here now. Get them all roughly the same size, so I can get them all the same distance. If you make them irregular sizes, it's very difficult to get them all to hit the same spot. I'll do about half a dozen at a time. All right, that'll do me for my first little baiting up. Now, a nice big catapult, and I'm going to drop those in that gap in the trees over there, look. Put a little line of them. This is going to create a huge amount of flavour out there and a nice bit of colour, which is quite important because, as you can see, the river's very low, it's very clear. So a little bit of colour will also help to give the fish a little bit more confidence to feed. And believe it or not, they love the sound of that going in. So there's half a dozen balls of that gone in straight away, and there's enough there to keep me going for the rest of the morning. So now I shall keep pinging those pellets in, as I've said. We'll fire that in up in that top line above the barbel, because interestingly, chub are a mid-water species. Their eyes are on the side of their head. They won't sit on the bottom, they won't sit on the top, they'll sit somewhere in the middle until some food source crops up. This is going to be that food source, and by constantly firing this pellet up there on the surface, the fish will slowly rise up and up and up in the water to source where it's coming from. And by the time I get my fishing rod set up, I reckon they'll be within 2 foot of the surface, and that's how deep we'll fish for them. But we must keep remembering to come down here and put a bit more ground bait in and a bit more pellet in for the next hour or so while we set the fishing tackle up, and then the scene is set. Well, as you can see, I'm fairly cool about this. We'll see whether my confidence is well placed or not. But I'm really trying to emphasise this point. Let that bait get working. I'm going to go for the chub first. I like to really let the barbel stew on that bait for even longer, whereas the chub, they'll react fairly quickly to that. So I'm just going to simply set up a float rod to start with. I love fishing with a centre pin reel, and any excuse I get to do it, I will. And the point with the centre pin is, it's not how long it will spin for that proves whether it's any good, it's how sensitive it is. Because when I cast, it's got to suddenly react to my cast. When I'm trotting, I'm going to just be touching this with my thumb and slowing it down, so the float goes down the stream very slowly. Quite simply, let me take a moment and explain to you. If I'm fishing out there in 4 foot of water, the surface of it may well be doing walking pace, about 2 miles an hour. The middle water will be doing about 1 mile an hour, but the bit down the bottom will actually probably hardly be moving at all, and that's where my bait is. So I don't just want to cast out and let the float go off down the flow, because it will tow the bait much faster than the speed down here. So I have to hold it back, and the way you do that is you use a centre pin, and with your thumb against the side of it, you're brushing it and holding the float back. The other thing we need to do is get some silicone spray and spray the line before we start, because the line wants to float. So now I've just simply sprayed that bit of silicone on there, this line will float right on the surface. So when my float's out there and I need to mend the line or pick it up or strike, it'll be sat on the surface instead of sunk down deep where I can't move it. I've made the point that you want to make this line float. It's monofilament. I don't use braid for any of these styles of fishing, they sink. Monofilament floats, which is much preferred for float fishing, and I'm using 6-pound line straight the way through, which may seem a little heavy, but some of those chub out there are fairly big, 4 or 5 pounds or more. Quite often the barbel come along and poke their nose in, and if you hook one of those on the float rod, you'll be glad you've got some 6-pound line on. Now we'll sort out the end bits. Next bit that'll surprise you, size of the float. If it was really calm and I was fishing down the inside, I'd probably go down to 5 BB, which is what that is. That's the smallest float in my box. Excuse me talking with fishing line in my mouth. But this is 5 AA. The big mistake so many people make when they're float fishing is to use a float that's too small. It sits on the water and it's going down the river like this. Well, imagine if your float is going down the river moving like that and the top of the float's moving that little bit. Down here the bait's doing this. And the fish are going to go, well, what the hell's that about? So it needs to be a good sized float, plenty shot, keep it sat there, solid, so it goes down nice and smooth and the fish won't be suspicious of it. So, nice big piece of rubber on the top. Such a tight fit, I've got to lick it to even get it to go on. And then look at the size of the piece of rubber I've got on the bottom. Now the point of this long piece of tubing on the bottom, a much bigger piece of tubing than you'd expect to go on the bottom of the float. Now the reason for that is, you can see it overlaps the bottom of the float considerably, but there's a lot of weed out there. So when I hook a fish and the fish dives down through the weed, that will just come down through the weed, as easy as that. Whereas if that finished further up, like so, I leave an angle there. So, because as soon as the fish dives down through the weed, that'll jam and I'll lose my fish. So there's simple little things that make all the difference between getting the fish out of a river like this or losing them. Now I'm going to put a spade end hook on. It stands straight out from the end of the line. So often when you put an eye hook on, it will be slightly off at slight angle. That's absolutely straight off the end of the line and stays there. As I try to draw it over my finger, it will simply draw the hook in perfectly. Hook size, a 10. Never a one for small hooks, me. Can't see the point. Fish aren't scared of hooks. Fish are scared of line. It's line that spooks fish off. They're used to their food that they pick up having bits of stick and bits of twig and stuff all involved in it. Just look at the bottom of the river and you can see. So we're tackled up and we're ready to fish. As you can see, the bulk of my shot are down here below the float to get the bait through the surface water fairly quickly, because even in a place like this, it's not all big fish. There's minnows about, there's bleak about, there's little dace, all sorts of stuff, little perch. I don't actually want to catch those. I want to get my bait down in that water column, down to those chub. Then I have a telltale shot, always keeps me in touch with the hook, so this doesn't flap around too much in the flow when it gets down there. Plus actually, my pellet will actually sink slower than the rest that I fire out there, because it's towing the line down. So I need that one little shot to get my pellet to sink down at the same speed as all the rest of them, which is quite important. And then, as I've said, we hold the thing back once we get it out there. So we've got this big lot of shot so that it doesn't come right up in the water like this. It tends to stay down. If I only had 3, 4, 5 BB on, this would come up in the water. That flow is quite strong. And as soon as I hold the float back, this will ride up in the water and again give it an unnatural presentation, which is no good. So far so good. We've got our bait in, we've taken our time choosing our spot, we've taken our time putting our tackle together. Now one last thing I need to show you before I actually start fishing is how we actually put the pellet on, because it's hard, the pellet's hard. So somebody came up with this lovely idea of these tiny little latex bands. And the easiest thing to do is to put the band on the hook and then use the hook to stretch the band over the pellet and get the band nicely around the centre of the pellet. Then that's in the perfect position with the hook sticking straight up off of it. So we're still on the gently approach. The chub rod's made up and ready. We'll just get a few more balls of ground bait. Get those barbel in that feeding frenzy. That's the one we're trying to get to. So again, 4 balls, all the same size. And I'll pick that landmark so I know I can fire at the same spot every time. So I'm congregating my fish rather than spreading them around. If you can't get your ground bait in accurately and in the same spot all the time, you're fighting against yourself. So that's my barbel satisfied for a little while longer. I've got a few more pellets in, keep my chub happy. They love that little plinky plinky sound as they land. And then all that remains to do is to fish. We get just a few more of those pellets out there. And then there's that first cast of the day, which, as my friend Mr. Yates will tell you, is often the most important cast of the day. And there's our chub. There you go, and people say chub don't fight. Look at the bend in that rod. Maybe it's just wide chub and particularly fit. But I love these fish up here, they're beautiful. The thing you must never do is never let your rod get down flat, because then when the fish thumps, it pings your line. It's the rod all the time being up here, it's the shock absorber. It's taking out all those shocks. Now the next trick that these chub often do is, because I'm the only snag out here, I'll get it close to me and it'll dive between my legs. It's quietening down now. As I say, you just bring them steadily alongside of you. Right, he's got a little bit more left in him. And then literally just grasp them across the back of the neck. First chub of the day. Thank you very much. Now, was that worth all that nice steady approach? I think it was worth every bit of it, don't you? So now it's back to the gently. Put the rod back in the waders. Get some more pellet out there. So many times again, as soon as someone's caught a fish, they can't wait to get the float back out there to catch the next one. No, get some more bait out there. Keep that confidence thing going all the time. What's even more delightful about it is the longer I keep this up and the more I keep putting this bait in, the more the bigger fish will come along and start to push the smaller fish out of the way. I'm not ungrateful, that was a nice chub, but it's not the biggest chub in the Y. So again, we take our time, we try to do a nice steady cast, right where we've been dropping all those pellets. It's essential to hit it right where the pellets have been landing, because that's where the fish will have been congregating. They're on it and off of it so quickly, I didn't even get a chance to strike on that one. We're out of the taking zone now. Again, there's no point in trotting miles off down the river. That's where the bait's been landing, that's where the fish will have been congregating. That's the one. Oh! So that float hardly cocked, it just landed on the surface and just shot away. Oh, don't believe it. I've dropped it. Let's check the hook. Still got the pellet. And the chub are back. Great. I love it. They just sit there to defy you against that current to start with. People say chub don't fight. They clearly don't fish for Y chub, do they? You can see that fish is coming across that weed. Remember when I said about having the float set up so that it doesn't get snagged in the weed? Slowly but surely, got to bring him back through that weed. There, he's through the weed. Now we're trying to hold him. And that top float rubber's broken, coming through that weed. I'm swinging around to the near side of me where there's very, very little current. Just take our time, take our time. Nice fish. And he's nearly ours. Look at that. I know they're good chub when you can only just get your hand across their back. You're talking about a seriously good chub. And that is a seriously good chub. Right in the very, very top of the lip there. One glorious, glorious white chub. Lovely great head. Look at the size of that. You worry about baits and hook sizes. Anything could disappear into there. My old friend the chub, I love them. You're probably thinking, well, is it going to be that easy where I fish? Maybe not. The fish here are very unpressured. They feed office hours. The fish where you live may well not. They may well feed just in the evening, maybe in the night. But still give yourself that time. You've noticed all day long, we've taken time. We've gone along, we've looked for places, we've looked for fish. I mean, look, coming along here now, and there's an old, lovely old route down there and a fish sat right next to it. Now, you'd miss that if you were just walking along, worrying about your fishing tackle, worrying about whether you got the right flavour bait. Don't let all those things bother you. It's that taking your time, find the fish, get the bait going in, let them build up on the bait. No rush to get your fishing tackle out. Even if you've only got 3 hours to fish one evening, take your time. Even if you only fish for the last hour, that's all you need to have a good day. I hope your days go as well as mine have. Now, I'm going to fish the herring. I'm going to try and get the fish to bolt against a big feeder.